Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today, we're going to talk about Voices of Wrestling. Again, one of my favorite punching bags on this channel. They've been doing a conversation on the difference between public relations and WWE and AEW. They did a 45-minute podcast, which I listened to and will summarize for you. In addition to that, they also posted an article discussing how this public relations campaign is lying about the WWE draft and the NFL draft. I'm going to go through that with you as well. Now, here is the corner. This is a little bit different. This isn't a situation in which these guys are wrong. The problem here is that it's so painfully obvious that it's irrelevant. It's not a story. It's not an issue. You did not find Oz behind the curtain pulling the strings. Every single major public corporation has public relations. Every single one of them pumps propaganda at you 100% of the time. I mean, if you don't listen to nothing else that I say, understand what I'm saying. WWE pumps propaganda at you. So what? So does McDonald's. So does Joe Biden. So does Donald Trump. And so does anybody who's running for a judge in your neighborhood. The manga industry, the comic book industry, the movie industry. It all pumps propaganda at you 100% of the time. And they will control as much of the media as they can. This is not news. It's not. Chris Legento. Oh, we talk about Chris Legento. Do you know who that is? His LinkedIn is public. The announcement of him getting the job is public. They're not hiding the guy. All right? But let's talk about this thing. Let's talk about it. Which one do you want to do first? Let's talk about the article first, because I want this one, because this one's going to be very short. I'm not going to end up reading the entire article. What I want to do is just show you how ridiculous Voices of Wrestling have gotten. They posted an article on April the 30th. It says, quote, over the weekend, WWE's top of the industry public relations department was once again hard at work carpet bombing wrestling media with the news that SmackDown's demo ratings were neck and neck with the NFL draft on ABC. Be warned, whenever WWE blatantly performs one of their PR hits, it's almost always a red flag that they are either attempting to bury one story or get ahead of another. In this case, WWE knew that SmackDown did not fare well on Friday night and were attempting to set the narrative that they were instead, quote, neck and neck. The verbiage, each tweet touting the numbers used, verbiage obviously pushed by PR with the NFL draft. The goal was to get that repeated all weekend long so that when the actual rating dropped on Monday, the narrative that SmackDown was neck and neck would have already been set, leading people to believe that WWE was on par ratings-wise with the NFL. Now, I'm going to skip the rest of this because it's basically more of the same thing. So they talk about what the numbers that were posted. These are pretty much the national numbers, okay, what they call the fast nationals, okay? So WWE, I guess, provided the fast nationals to whoever put this out. They didn't say who. They say various media outlets. WWE draft 690K in the 18 to 49 number 2. The P 18 to 49 rating a 0.5. NFL draft on ABC. He says P 18 to 49, 682,000 people. P 18 to 49, a 0.5 rating. So it's exactly the same. NFL got 3,000 more viewers. That's what they reported. These are the fast nationals. Now here is where I kind of roll my eyes. It should be noted that the NFL draft aired across 4 networks on Friday night. ABC, ESPN, ESPN Deportes, and the NFL Network. Yet, WWE's PR slyly compared SmackDown to ABC numbers only. They are counting on most people not knowing that the NFL Draft is a multi-network simulcast and simply being impressed that SmackDown went neck and neck with the mighty NFL. The PR blast also curiously omitted the total viewership, which they always seem to include when covertly providing SmackDown versus Rampage Fast Nationals. I wonder why. By the time I finish this next part, if you're smart, you'll figure out why they did this thing the way that they did it. And it is not a PR campaign. All right. It's not. It just isn't. All right. So let's continue. The final cumulative numbers tell a different story. In the end, not only did SmackDown lose outright to the ABC portion of the NFL Draft, 2.7 million, 0.61 for the NFL Draft on ABC, 2.1 million, 0.58 for SmackDown. But cumulatively, it wasn't even close. The combined numbers of the 4 simulcasts of the NFL Draft were 5 million viewers, including ESPN Deportes with a 1.37 in the 18 to 49 demo. The demo information was unavailable for ESPN Deportes, although at thereabouts 14,000 total viewers, the 18 to 49 number would likely be strategically insignificant for our purposes. Now, they go on to talk about how the WWE is this was the lowest rating for the year, and that SmackDown was down year over year. But I stopped right here. I didn't even read the rest of this thing because they're stupid. But what's even worse is they think you're stupid. The reason why WWE compared Fox and ABC only is because you cannot compare cable and broadcast television. Nobody does that ever. You compare like objects. ABC is broadcast television. Fox is broadcast television. They're on at the same time. They're competing neck and neck. That's why they used the broadcast television. That's why they only mentioned ABC. Because they're not competing in the cable bracket. That's common sense. It's literally, if you go to spoiler.tv, where they get their numbers from, they literally separate things by broadcast television and cable. These things are literally separate. Why would the source of your information separate these two things if they're the same thing? See, it's not enough for them to be stupid. They want you to be stupid. This is just flat out fucking dumb. All right? This is stupid. It's stupid. This is not a conspiracy. It's not. SmackDown lost to the NFL Draft, but it was close. 0.61 versus 0.58, that's close. That's within 0.03 points. That's close. They did lose in the overall viewers by over 500,000. 2.69 million for the NFL Draft. 2.143 million for SmackDown. Just for those of you who might want to know. So now I went and listened to this 45-minute podcast as this, I forget what the gentleman's name is, but he runs the Voices of Wrestling podcast, the flagship thing. Talk about the massive PR advantage between AEW and WWE. I'm going to go through some of the arguments presented in this thing. Argument number one is that AEW is under constant attack. Okay, you're showing me now that you're not a non-biased piece of business here. That you're a biased piece of business. You think that AEW is being treated unfairly, which is a Tony Khan position. That's what Tony Khan thinks. So he says that the wrestling media is full of grifters and amateurs, and not enough serious professionals. I'll put a check mark there because I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. He said we're going to start at the top of the food chain with the biggest creators who are anti-AEW or create the anti-AEW narrative. And he immediately starts talking about Jim Cornette and Eric Bischoff. So I say, well, wait a minute. Isn't somebody missing from that conversation? Where's Dave Meltzer? Why aren't we talking about Dave Meltzer? So he didn't mention Dave Meltzer, by the way. He mentioned him later in a different context. We'll talk about that when we get there. So he says that Cornette and Bischoff are anti-AEW, and he feels that Jim Cornette is at least genuine, while Eric Bischoff is a fraud and a grifter who has nothing to add to pro wrestling. And he cites Eric Bischoff calling Tama Tonga a great young talent, saying he doesn't know anything about Tama Tonga. That could be possible. It could also be that Eric Bischoff is in his 60s, and anybody who is in their 40s is significantly younger than him, and he may refer to him as a young talent, or maybe he just didn't know how old the guy was, or he is just a grifter and he didn't know. Maybe. We don't know that part, right? So this is an interesting bit, but he also doesn't mention how Tony Khan triggered Eric Bischoff, and we already know what happened. Tony Khan made some comments about Ted Turner that pissed off Eric Bischoff and led Eric Bischoff to being more negative towards AEW. Remember, Eric Bischoff was actually featured on AEW a couple of times throughout the first 5 years. I think he was on AEW 2 or 3 times. On screen for them a couple of times. He says that from Cornette and Bischoff, you get guys like Conan and Disco and Al Snow who spew anti-AEW rhetoric, all because it's good for business. YouTubers, Twitter engagers, everybody wants to rag on AEW because it's good for business, and that no counterbalance exists, and that negativity about AEW drives engagement on the internet. And I say, okay, well, what about guys like JD from New York? What about guys like Solomonster? What about guys like Voices of Wrestling or WrestleNomics? I mean, Cultaholic. There's innumerate number of wrestling websites that are overwhelmingly positive for AEW for the most part. They may criticize Tony Khan when they can't do nothing but criticize Tony Khan, but they're overwhelmingly positive towards AEW. And quite a few of these accounts that I've mentioned have been overwhelmingly negative against WWE for years. But it doesn't fit his narrative. Let's go to Dave Meltzer. He says that Meltzer is denigrated because he's the true wrestling journalist. He knows what he's talking about. He's got 40 years of experience, and people like Eric Bischoff discredit the media. And he says that Dave Meltzer is not a flag waver for AEW. You'd know that if you listen to him. I say, well, have you ever seen the Meltzer tweet? He just literally called Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay the greatest wrestling match to happen in North America. That's insane. That's not something anybody with a non-biased view of pro wrestling would say. He was talking about the Young Bucks. I don't ever see him attack young talent in AEW the way he attacks young talent in WWE. Specifically, I've never seen him say anything negative about a young talent in AEW the way he attacked Trick Williams in NXT. I've never seen that before. I've never seen him go after a young talent in AEW the same way. Brian Alvarez is increasingly negative about WWE. Now, AEW has done some things recently that have been so bad that you can't ignore it. And that's why so many other people are getting their bona fides for being fair and balanced, quote unquote, by criticizing AEW because they've done things recently that have been so obviously stupid that you can't say nothing but it's stupid, or you're being disingenuous and you're lying to people. Now, even though I think some people are biased, and pretty much everybody is to a degree, you're not going to alienate your audience by staring them dead in the face and calling a shit sandwich a ham sandwich. Nobody is that damn stupid. All right? So Even all of these guys who I've been, they are who they are. They are not going to look at a shit sandwich and say, that's a ham sandwich. Because if they do that, then their audience is like, why are you lying to me? Just don't lie to me. I don't have to agree with your opinions, but don't lie to me that you actually like this shit that nobody likes. Again, the evidence of your eyes is the most obvious thing. People are starting to criticize AEW because the energy of the crowd is down. The buildings are empty. The ratings are going down. The wrestlers are getting hurt. There's more and more people complaining. There's people leaving. There's more restructuring in the office. New people being brought in. More people leaving. There's all kinds of stuff. Tony Khan's very public gaffes. This is not, some stuff happening in a back room that might not be that interesting. Tony Khan making silly comments, looking weird, doing weird stuff is almost always recorded so people can see it. Almost always. Either it's a tweet that he typed himself and put out himself that people are making fun of, or he's going on a podcast or a television show using his own face, saying silly things out of his own mouth. You cannot ignore that. It's in your face. You can't ignore it. You can't not see it. So when people start criticizing Tony Khan, which is what his problem is, you're posting unflattering pictures of Tony Khan on your thumbnail. What else am I supposed to do when this guy goes on TV and says ridiculous stuff? When he's doing ridiculous things on social media, am I not supposed to talk about it? I'm supposed to just forget about it? Pretend I didn't see it? What? That's ridiculous. If Austin Aries says something stupid, every wrestling YouTuber that you listen to is going to see it and talk about it. If Low Key said something stupid, Val Venus says stupid things, every wrestling podcast, every wrestling media outlet talks about it. They discuss it. So why would Tony Khan be immune to that? Nonsense. Let's get into this thing. So he continues by saying there's no anti-WWE media. And he thinks that Voices of Wrestling is fair. Even though he had a guy named Suit Williams on Twitter openly say that he wants WWE to fail. And this guy works for Voices of Wrestling. And he said this on a Twitter account that he runs himself. I mean, come on. So then he starts talking about the real issue that he's got. That the mainstream media is co-opted by WWE. And he starts talking about their 40-year head start, which is a comparison between the public relations of WWE and the public relations of AEW. And that Nick Khan, through CAA agency, has connections with all these various powerful people in the media. And he makes the Vince McMahon story go away. He's putting out puff pieces, all this kind of stuff. But he doesn't say, he talks about it like it's through coercion and power and that kind of stuff. Instead, you have to look at things broadly. Why aren't they talking about Vince McMahon so much? The wrestling media thinks that you should be talking about this stuff 24/7. That's what they think. The real world does not really care that much because there's constantly protests on college campuses. There's constantly somebody getting beat up in the street. They're trying to promote race riots. Trump says something stupid. They have to talk about that. Biden fall down the stairs. Somebody got to talk about that. Some senator somewhere proposes some bill to ban abortion or to promote witchcraft or whatever the fuck. They have to talk about that. Vince McMahon, over time, loses relevance. There's nothing to talk about. Oh, he was accused of sex trafficking. Okay, now what? We talk about it. We talk to some other people about it. Ask Triple H. Ask Cody. Ask Seth Rollins. Ask CM Punk. Ask Drew McIntyre. Ask all these people. But ultimately, Trump said something stupid. We have to talk about that. Biden fell down the stairs. He's eating ice cream again. We got to talk about that. Black Lives Matter and Free Palestine. We got to talk about that. Israel is at war. We got to talk about that. When you compare the Vince McMahon story to the massive other issues that are going on in the world, it's not that big a deal. And I know people don't like that because it's minimizing, but it's reality. How many multi-billionaires have been sued for sex trafficking and sexual assault in the last 2 or 3 years? He's not the first and only one. There have been innumerable number of these people since New York passed that law, even though I know this is not under that law. L.A. Reid of, the music industry is being sued for sexual assault and digital rape. Digital rape, which means with his fingers, by the way. They're not talking about that at the Grammys. They're not talking about it in every single news article that the music industry is talking about. They're not talking about this that much. You report it and then you update it as updates come. That's how you do basic media. You can't try to make this thing something that it's not. You only have the information that you have. So it's not like Nick Khan is waving a magic wand to make people not talking about it. They have other things to talk about. They have more pressing and important and developing issues to discuss than 78-year-old Vince McMahon and a 43-year-old woman who everybody posted a picture of her that looks like she was 22 or 19 or something. We don't need to talk about that. He starts talking about Chris Legentil. That Chris Legentil was, is a PR guy in WWE. He puts out puff pieces. He's been in the restructuring. Now he runs talent relations. He helps run talent relations. And he talking about like he's the wizard behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Oh, do you know who Chris Legentil is? No, and I don't care. I don't give a shit. Oh, he's putting out puff pieces. Oh, Triple H, he thanked the staff backstage at WrestleMania. That's not going to change my opinion of Triple H. Now, there may be some people who are going to be swayed by that, but most intelligent people don't even click that story. They don't care. They don't care about that. That's not going to change anybody's opinion. All right, so who gives a shit? Then he starts talking about the Fast Nationals. That is the Fast Nationals. They've been getting put out and to make Rampage look bad. Not like people walking up, leaving the building when Rampage happens doesn't make Rampage look bad. Not the fact that the building is almost empty every time you watch Rampage, or the fact that nothing ever happens on Rampage, and AEW barely even references what happens on Rampage, makes Rampage look bad. It's the fact that no. It's Big Nasty putting out the Fast Nationals. That makes AEW look bad. Kick rocks, all right? It's ridiculous. Now, he mentions that WWE is suing the state of Texas to prevent the releasing of financial information, such as the accepted bid, how much did the state or the city pay them to host, I think it was the Royal Rumble, what the gate was, all that kind of stuff, because it may be damaging information. That's true. That's a good point. You don't see people talking about a lot about that because it's a lawsuit, and that lawsuits are notoriously very boring. Also, if this information was to get out, people would talk about the information. Hey, the WWE is suing the state of Texas to prevent that information from coming out. What more is there to that story? Oh, they think that this may prevent other states and cities from bidding on that information. And, it may be damaging to their bottom line, even though they have to announce that how much money they made and all this kind of stuff. Okay. Now what? Now, what am I supposed to do with it? How is this actionable information for me? It's not really. Just if you can get the information, that would be great. If you can't, that's fine too. But we know that people uncritically posted the All In, what Tony Khan said it was. What did he say it was? 82,000 or something like that? And, that was completely uncritical of them to just take him at his word for it. But there's no positive PR for AEW. But I am concerned about the WWE suing the state of Texas to prevent that. I knew about it. It's just not relevant. I don't care. All right. The building wasn't empty. And they told me 100 million people was in the building and I saw 50. You know, if they're off like by like 2,000 or whatever, or they comped a certain number of people, I mean, I don't give a shit. It is what it is. I'm also very much against WWE being given public money to run in these venues. This is like the 8th or 9th time I've said that. I am against public money going towards sporting events, and that includes pro wrestling events. 100% against it. Then he starts talking about the personal relationships that people in the media have, and they're doing this stuff so that they can maintain relationships, business relationships, but also emotional relationships with WWE. They want their press passes. They want people to like them, feed them stories for engagement, all this kind of stuff. And all this is true. But this is also true of media in general. Again, it's so obvious that it's a non-issue. All right? Again, every media does this. They all do it. WWE gives puff stories to the media and they report it. They get a little bit of engagement. They have a relationship with, the WWE PR. When they come to do the shows, they get the little press pass and they go and get to ask questions, and that's fine. One of the guys like Brandon Thurston, who is, very critical of WWE, he's said that he has never been refused a press pass at WWE events, despite the fact that he's pretty negative against WWE quite often. But the issue that we have here, I guess, is the second element, the emotional element. That, people have been fans for 30 years, 40 years. Wrestling media tends to be fans quite often. That they have an emotional attachment to the company, and they want to see the company do well, and they want to see everything, be all roses for WWE. That part is somewhat true. There's a lot of people who are emotionally attached to the company. They're emotionally attached to the wrestlers. That's the very nature of pro wrestling, is to engage the fan on an emotional level. It's not a real sporting event. All right. So the point is to get to people emotionally. So I did give him a good checkpoint on that. That's a really good argument. Is somebody going to report something that is going to destroy WWE? Well, most people don't consider it. They're going to destroy the WWE. They say, you're going to make WWE better. We're going to report on this so that Vince McMahon, his cronies, and other people who were involved can get out of the company so that the company can move forward as a better company than they were when those guys were there. That's usually how people who are emotionally attached to the company approach the subject. They're not emotionally attached to the individuals like Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and those guys. They're emotionally attached to the company, the legacy of The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, maybe not Ultimate Warrior, Randy Savage, Bret the Hitman Hart, everybody's favorite. And they don't want to denigrate those guys, but they hate Vince and they want to get Vince out of there. So the idea that people are emotionally attached to the company, true, but that doesn't mean that people won't see a sacrifice of individuals for the betterment of the good as a possible outcome of what they are doing. Because that's what everybody thinks always. It's what they always think, and that's how business works. Let's go through this. That was pretty much the long and the short of the Voices of Wrestling 45-minute debacle that I had to sit through to bring this story to you. So I want to rebut. I just want to buttress my point a little bit. That this is a non-issue. It's a non-story. Do you remember Donald Sterling, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, who was ousted from the league but for making racist comments? What happened to that guy? He got fired, right? They forced him out. Did the NBA continue to talk about it once he was gone? No. They moved on. Don't you think they would have said, well, isn't this a cultural issue? I mean, he's the boss. They were like, no, he's a racist. Get him out of here. They got him out of there. And then they moved on. Is that public relations? Is that the dark arts of... No. Dan Snyder, this is an NFL story. Guy who used to own the Washington Redskins or the Washington Commanders or whatever. He was a scumbag and a bully. What did they do? They forced him out. They forced him to sell his team. And do they talk about him today? Nope. They don't talk about him no more. You probably haven't heard that name in a long time. The league and the bureaucrats within the league, they focus on the game. They get you to focus on the game. Talk about the game. Let's talk about the game. ESPN, all right, let's talk about Donald Sterling when he's there. Let's talk about Dan Snyder. But it ever gets to a point where that's not a story anymore. We got rid of that guy. That story is over. The Vince McMahon thing isn't quite over because the settlement, the lawsuit is not settled yet. So there's going to be continuous updates. But when it comes to Donald Sterling and Dan Snyder, these cases, these guys were gone. They talked about it a little bit. Now there are footnotes. You don't talk about it anymore. The public relations of the NFL get the fans to focus on the game. Keep talking about the game. The game is what matters. Who's going to play who? Who's playing tonight? Who's playing this week? And the fans are focused on the game. They're not focused on Donald Sterling and Dan Snyder. Those guys are gone. Why are we still talking about them? The team is playing. We need to be watching the team. Because that's how public relations works. How many times have an NFL player been busted for domestic violence or rape or anything else? The media talks about it, but ultimately they end up back on the game. They don't harp on it forever. Nobody except the wrestling media thinks you're supposed to talk about this stuff ad nauseum. You talk about it, and if there's updates, you talk about the updates, but other than that, you address it and you move on. And guess what? There is no more co-opted media than ESPN, because ESPN literally follows monopolies. The NBA is a monopoly, the NFL is a monopoly, the NHL is a monopoly, and Major League Baseball is a monopoly. They are the most co-opted media in the entirety of the United States. There is no more co-opted media than ESPN. And hundreds of millions of people watch ESPN. And they don't care about these owners that get fired. The owners are talked about constantly until they're gone. Once they're gone, the league says, oh, we're clean again. Resume play. And everybody's like, okay, let's go back to playing game. They don't care anymore. You want to talk about good PR? Did you know that the Jacksonville Jaguars had the worst team facilities in the NFL? They were ranked 28th. There were rats infested in the laundry room in the Jacksonville Jaguars. How many people know that? You would have to be a super fan of football to know that. I remembered seeing it floating around the internet. That's why I looked it up. Good public relations, you wouldn't talk about stuff like this. You know what I'm saying? That's covered up. The fact that the Tony Khan and his family owns the Jacksonville Jaguars and they have the worst facilities in the NFL. Well, some of the worst facilities. I think it's 30 teams. They were 28. There's 2 teams worse, but they got an F from the teams union for facilities. So, what are we talking about here? We're not talking about anything. This whole thing is a nothing burger. Tony Khan's got plenty of money. He can hire a PR firm if he wants to. He chooses not to. He wants to do it himself. The problem is he goes out there, he says something silly, it bounces back on him, it makes the company look bad, and then these guys talk about, oh, AEW, they're being bullied. Get the hell out of here, man. When Vince goes on television and says something stupid, it washed back on WWE just the same. It is what it is. It's that Vince, in his later years, realized he doesn't have to be out there doing all that talking. So he didn't. So what they would try to do is they would try to get him on the phone during these conference calls to get him to say something. And they successfully did that occasionally. But for the most part, no. They didn't do that kind of stuff. He knew better. All in all, they all have a PR firm. Anybody who's operating in the public space has a PR firm. And that includes people who are suing other people. All right? Relax. It's not that big a deal. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.